Thank you very much. We want to use this opportunity to welcome you to another interesting, fascinating edition of the Justice Forum. Here at the Justice Forum, we discuss a wide range of issues relative to the destiny of our one world, our common humanity. Well, it's good that we can be back here again today. Interestingly enough, we have a brother who's joining us from Cincinnati, Ohio. When it comes to issues of faith, justice, the current state of affairs of the world, there's no one else than the scholar I've invited to talk to today as we deliberate on a wide range of issues concerning the well-being of our one world, not only the global faith community, but the world in itself. We are in quite challenging times, times that sometimes we wonder in this liminal season of COVID where we are headed. And it's good that you have joined us. We want to welcome you to another fascinating and inspiring edition of Justice Forum. Justice is never possible without adequate theology. Theology has a crucial role to play, faith has the role to play, and moral clarity to some of the issues that we face in the world. Let me welcome my guest, my distinguished colleague who's joining me from Cincinnati, Ohio. First, I would say congratulations to Pastor Julian Cook. Pastor Cook, the last time visited us on this network a couple of months back. Then he spoke to us from Buffalo, New York. Then pastor there. Now he has a new assignment. I'm not going to go into the details. We welcome our brother. And by way of full disclosure, Pastor Cook is a candidate in the PhD program. He's on his way out of Drew University, Madison, New Jersey. That's where our history actually intertwined. A brother from the South and a brother who has a lineage with West Africa and the man from Chicago, from the South Side. Let me welcome you, Brother Cook. I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
I'm
Welcome to the show.
thank you so much, Doctor Pede. It's a privilege to join you again. Anytime I can be in your presence, it is always an outstanding honor. And we I guess we could say we go way back now
Oh,
to
yeah,
the
that's
dorm
right.
time in Drew, trying to make it through, and you were always such a blessed colleague, a blessed and blessed colleague in the forest, as they call it. So
That's right.
it's a
That's
great
right.
pleasure to share with you. Thank you for the
Yeah.
invitation. I may have some technical issues, and if I do, I may try to get you on my other computer. So just know it's freezing a little bit, but we're making it happen.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's good that you can join us from Cincinnati. I've been wondering how time flies, and the last time when you were on our forum, you were there in Buffalo
Yes.
during that shooting incident.
Hmm.
I looked from a distance, and I could see my brother on national and international TV.
Hmm.
Now you are Cincinnati. As we begin this conversation, talk to me a little as we begin. What has the transitioning been like for you coming from Buffalo? How did you leave the folks there in the midst of that shooting incident that took several lives? And I certainly surmise that there are still people who are wounded and
Yeah.
recuperating from that particular experience. Talk to us for the benefit of our audience today as you appear again on the Justice Forum.
Yeah, yeah. That's a challenging question for a number of reasons. It's challenging as far as leaving the community because there's a sense in which we have left physically. We are no longer residents of that area. But there's also another sense in which we feel so deeply tied that it almost feels that we have never left, right? We feel so deeply tied to the people. Our work is so ingrained in the community, and we continue to maintain such strong relationships in that area that it can be challenging to even think of it as having left. But I recognize, as you do, that physical presence matters a lot, and the offering of leadership in that space. I no longer am pastoring or serving as a college dean in that space, and that's very hard. That's been a hard transition. I love where I am, and I have embraced the newness of this opportunity, but have struggled with what it means to have been so involved and so ingrained in the community in Buffalo, and now to be here, especially on the heels of such incredible violence. And not just the violence that we saw demonstrated, the unforgettable violence that we saw demonstrated in the shooting that has now become known as the Tops Massacre.
That's
And I
right.
and I even say that with great difficulty because it's difficult when we give these things these names. Sometimes it seems as if we're almost depersonalizing them, right?
Hmm.
But this Tops Massacre. Uh, but there's ongoing white supremacist violence that has existed in that space, and we've got to be able to think about what it means broadly for those things to still exist in that space. And I'll stop there. But
That's right. And as you indicate to us here quite clearly, that remains a trauma
yes,
that is practically going to live with you for quite a long
oh
time. And I
yes,
tell people, once one encounters violence, depending on where you are, especially from a therapeutic standpoint, where you are serving a community as a pastoral leader, a resident in the community, a scholar in the community, one can clearly understand from whence you come.
hmm
Uh, how is the transitioning going in Cincinnati, Ohio? You are on the other side now as we speak.
yeah.
Buffalo and Cincinnati. Let's do some comparative analysis briefly as we dive into our conversation today. How are you being treated? You been received
Well,
to the new folks at Lincoln
Heights.
Heights Missionary Baptist Church.
Well, thankfully, we've been received incredibly warmly here in this space, as warmly. And this is my third. This is the third church that I've had the privilege of serving. And this has been an incredibly warm reception, about as warm as I think one can have, and that's been great. That's always a very good thing as a pastor to be received warmly,
That's right.
especially given the history of this space. There have been giants. I want to be clear on that. There have been giants that have walked this space ahead of me,
Okay.
especially when you think about progressive ministry and civil rights engagement. When I
That's
think of
right.
names like R.D. West or names like Bennett Walker Smith, one of the founders of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which, as you know, was the convention that was started
Oh
with Martin
yes,
Luther King after he was thrown out of the National Baptist Convention.
that's
This
right.
church was one of the first churches to make that transition. And so, to sit here, I am aware that there was a day when giants walked the earth, right? And that I walk in not just their footsteps, but I walk in new footsteps as well. And so it's important to feel their presence here. But yes, we've been welcomed warmly. And one of the things that you realize in traveling, as I have and as I know that you have, is the global impact, the global scope of white supremacist violence. It is everywhere. And I want to be clear because I know a lot of people shy away from that. We got whole states banning that, trying to ban that phrase from
That's
you
right.
saying that phrase in school. When I'm talking about white supremacist violence, people are going, "Oh, well, what are you? Are there lynchings in your area? Are there cross burnings in your area? Are people being killed?" Yeah, there's that, right? But there is also the ways in which systems and structures are situated intentionally to
That's correct.
consistently reproduce violence against the black body, violence against the black spirit. And we have to be uncompromising. And we also have to be very, very creative about the ways that we describe this, uncompromising in our commitment and creative in our commitment to talking about white supremacy and its global reach, patriarchy and its global reach, which we know patriarchy and white supremacy function hand in hand. And so, in many respects, that same white supremacy, Zay, that I left in Buffalo, it showed up on my doorstep here in
In
Cincinnati.
Cincinnati.
And it's on your doorstep there in Pennsylvania, and wherever else you go,
That's
it will
right.
because that's the scope of this issue. Now it has a different iteration here, right?
Mhm.
Cincinnati, as you know, has a long history of corporations in this space. There's the big three that many people often talk about, and so you have black what they say black faces in high places, right? You
That's
do have
right.
a level of significant black accomplishment and achievement in this area. But sometimes the trouble with black achievement, as you well know, is that it gives us the veneer that we are safe and that we are safely insulated. And yes,
No, not
it
at
gives
all.
us it gives some
That's
people
just a myth.
that it is not that's right. It gives some people a cushion from it, right? You don't
Yeah,
experience it in the ways that your brothers and sisters over on the chocolate side of town may experience it, but it's there for you as well. And so that's been a part of my message here. It shows up in a very clear way in Buffalo, but it's just as clear here in Cincinnati. It was clear in Boston. It was clear in Chicago when I was growing up. So go on and on and on. I could talk about that.
that's wonderful. And those of you who just joining us, we want to welcome you to the Justice Forum. This is a program. It discusses a wide range of national and international issues within this sacred and global space. My special guest today happens to be the senior pastor at Lincoln Heights Missionary Baptist Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. If you just join us, welcome to the show. We're looking at a wide range of issues as it relates to ethics, social justice, within the space and the liminal season that we find ourselves as peoples of the world. The world has become connected in a strategic way globally. That even for a person who is in Bombay today in India, can be able to communicate so easily with somebody who sits in Buffalo, New York,
Mhm.
and from Cape to Cairo, somebody from Cape Town could be easily be able to talk to somebody in Egypt.
Mm,
So we've become globally connected.
mm,
The paradigm here is these shifting narratives regarding supremacy and the fight to be able to encourage not only Black excellence, as you have reiterated about the current space that you find yourself in strategically as a senior pastor, the global space around Cincinnati. What is it like? I know you've not been there too long in terms of people that come from different walks of life. Speak to us. Your church is strategically located.
Yes.
And I was looking at some of the pictures online even before we started this conversation. What is that experience like? Have you been able to meet people? Are you engaging with people, or even as far as maybe church members at where you are, who probably a second, first generation? They've come from different parts of the world.
Yes. Well, I want to preface any remarks or analysis I make by saying, yes, you are right. I've only been here 6 months. And so those should, all of my analysis should be constrained by a level of incredible
Yeah, that's right.
humility
Yeah.
in that respect. And they certainly are. But sure, there are things that I have noticed as one who works in a sort of scholarly fashion on issues of justice and ethics, but also as a practitioner, right? One who is deeply involved in communities of discourse and practice around activism and so forth. I've noticed that there is significant class stratification in Buffalo. That is a tribute to having, as I said before, three major corporations, and some have noticed, they've said, well, you've not said the names of those corporations. Well, I'm not going to do that right now, but we do have three major, you should look that up. We have three major corporations right here in the city of Cincinnati, and so they bring incredible talent, I mean, from across the world to this space. We also have some major universities in this area, right? University of Cincinnati is a top university in our nation. And then when you think about the Conservatory of Music, the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, it is among the top institutions for music training in our world. And so there is a sense in which there is a global scope to Cincinnati that is a little bit that is different from some other spaces. I've noticed that class stratification, right? You still have on the chocolate side of town, as Cornel West says, some people who are incredibly poor. But you also
Yeah.
have, which we do not talk about in this country very often, we have white poor. We have
Oh yeah.
incredible white
Considerable,
poverty,
considerable white
considerable
poverty
white
that
poverty
exists.
in
Yeah.
the city of Cincinnati, and a lot of that, of course, is I would argue complexified. Right, it is made more complex by the fact that many of these folks who would fit into and we have statistics that demonstrate this, that fit into a sort of impoverished, when you think about statistically, fit into
Hmm.
poverty, right? Who are we would say that they are impoverished. Also, are very big supporters of a type of politics that does not have their interest. I would argue does not have their
Oh yeah.
interest at heart. It's a type
Yeah,
of identitarian politics, though, right? That does appeal to certain aspects of their racial identity, maybe
that's
even their
correct.
religious identity, but
Identity.
actually works against their interest socioeconomically. And so you have that challenge in this space is significant black poverty, significant white poverty, but the political answers to that poverty are often very, very different. And I serve a space in here in the village of Lincoln Heights, which you've alluded to, has a very rich history. It is the oldest black suburb in the United States of America. What does that mean? Well, that means it's the first black suburb in this nation to receive its own incorporation. And so it is called Lincoln Heights because it is a tract of land that was given to enslaved persons following emancipation. Cincinnati, of course, is in many respects the gateway to freedom for many folks who ran away from slaveholding territory. Cincinnati is the first city that many of them would hit, major
That's
city.
correct.
And so, I
Uh-huh.
mean, if you could cross the Ohio River, right, from Kentucky
Oh
to
yeah. Yeah.
Cincinnati, you were free. Uh,
You were free.
you were free. And so that spirit is here. But there's also a great deal of and that's a part of the contradiction that exists in a space like this, right? This incredible mythology and history around freedom, but these very clear examples of what one might call, and we use this term a lot in ethics, unfreedom, right? That there are various examples in a space like this of unfreedom. So it is very easy for African Americans who exist in spaces like these to assume, because they can attain certain resources, live in certain areas, get hired for certain jobs, that they are insulated from racism. And one of the places that we're seeing that right now in Ohio, period, but in particular in this area of Southern Ohio, as you well know, is in our schools. The battleground is in the schools, where Black children are in integrated classrooms. Black children of upper middle class parents are in integrated classrooms with many other white students. And there is, you're hearing these horrible stories every other day. NPR is talking about the Lakota school district, or talking about, right? You've heard the stories about Ohio's schools and the racial issues that are flowing out of it. And to hear the testimonies of these students of color and the pain that they are experiencing just trying to get an education in these spaces, it proves that their parents' accomplishments have not been able to insulate them from
No,
the assault
not
of
at
racism.
all.
Yeah.
No, and as long as you're a person of color with a black skin, it becomes quite a challenging proposition, as you have clearly identified. And that own freedom aspect of it that one can proclaim because of the level of wealth or the environment or the zip code that you find yourself in, you are not you are not insulated. I
You're
mean,
not.
that is, it comes within the context of American history and even
And
the
in some
challenge.
instances, not to interrupt you, but wanting to add to your brilliant analysis there, and in some instances may even be more, um, I might say more accessible or more prone to violation because of your proximity to
That's correct.
whiteness. There is an insulation, which gets back to that whole discussion about integration, right? There was an insulation that happened in many communities that grew up during Jim Crow, right? Of self-sufficiency. And that's not to say that one is better or the other. I mean, that's kind of a hard thing to choose from. Do I want to face consistent violation psychologically, physically, so on and so forth, or do I want to have a self-sufficient community? The reality is, I shouldn't have to make those types of choices. But part of the historic lineage, right, of integration and segregation in particular, was that you did have this insulation of some, not all, of some Black people from the
Yes.
consistent and persistent assault of racism. That's the story of the historically Black colleges and universities as well,
That's right. That's
is that it
right.
can shield one. Now, some of my friends who've gone to those places can say, well, yeah, but white supremacy, Black folk can also can also circumscribe and make
Oh
other
yes.
Black
Oh
folks
yes.
subject to
Uh,
white supremacy too.
oh yes. Oh yes. And it's a very complex conversation around there because
Yes.
I think there is some level of also ignorance in terms
Yes.
of as you have laid out, even those who found themselves in poor neighborhoods or those who are within a particular gap of poverty within the
Mm-hmm.
American context, either black or white, who see that they really do not know what the political manipulations are, that politicians will use them from different spectrums of the political engagement to
That's
score
right.
points. And these are talking points that they use. But in the real sense of the word, there's white poverty, there's black poverty, and those within those particular strategic demographics. There is a considerable degree of those who do not understand what is actually deeply prevailing in terms of the power structure. That these are
That's right.
systemic issues.
And
and
you
they are
got
all
challenges on both
interconnected.
ends. And
Yeah,
you got challenges on both ends that are deeply rooted in these aspirations, right? So that's the part we don't often, that's the part we never really get to. Yes, there is an element of racism involved in this. There's no doubt. But a lot of that racism is rooted in aspirations toward the middle class.
that's right.
And those same aspirations, this is the challenge, can exist within African American communities too.
Oh yeah. No, that is in every
And so I say
every
all the time,
demographic.
you ain't seen class stratification until you go to some of these black churches and black spaces.
That's right.
Right? Black folk can do class stratification in some places better than anybody I know. As so I had a friend who used to say he's more Victorian than the Victorians, right? I mean, it reminds me of the he's right. There's a history of that, right? Where African Americans overperform
Oh yeah,
this type of upper middle class element.
that's
And it
that's correct.
is rooted in these same aspirations and machinations for the upper echelon, right? For this.
That's
So in
correct.
some ways, it is William Julius Wilson, that great sociologist, would tell us it's always race and socioeconomics riding together, and enough
Oh yeah.
analysis does not get put on
No,
that
not
to
yeah,
tease them out.
not at all.
Yeah,
No, and that's the cave mentality that is referenced most of the time. Those who find themselves in the cave have an understanding of what's prevailing in the cave. They can
absolutely.
only have freedom when they come out to
Yes.
see what the ultra realities are within the context of what life looks like outside of the cave. And
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, and that even means our conceptualizations of what freedom is, right?
that's right.
Because if freedom for you has been so colonized, then freedom means for you just the ability to participate in rampant market capitalism. It means to have the ability to have the access to power in the same ways that have traditionally been accessed. Then I don't want that type of freedom. If that's what it means to you, I don't want any involvement in that. On my best days, I don't want any involvement in that. But if it means expanding our understandings of freedom, then and that's the work, decolonizing even the ways in which we think about freedom, daring to imagine something else. And that can be very, very difficult. And it's also very challenging to ask people to do that who are just trying to survive.
That's right.
It's
That's right.
it's challenging to ask people to invest that type of energy when they're just look, man, I got to pay my bills, right? Like
That's right.
I didn't create this world. I'm simply trying to function. So I get it. But it's at the same time, if we don't take that next step, boy, are we going to be in a lot of trouble.
That's right. And when there are folks that you see who say, well, they think they are part of the middle class. That's
That's
what they
the
were
other,
told.
those aspirations
Although,
again.
yeah, although there are difficulties and they can't even pay their bills,
Ain't never been
but
in the
when
middle class.
no, when the conversation is hard on the issue about how to bring about equity and
Yes.
making sure that even those who are at that level of the stratification of society can have opportunities, those who are even oppressed feel somehow violated, that you as a preacher is advocating the cause for an equitable and a society that is going to incorporate making sure that there is affordability.
Mm-hmm.
And then they see you probably as someone who will be characterized as a socialist. But
Oh.
talk to me about. I understand Cincinnati is a very it's a metropolitan city,
Mm-hmm.
and with COVID and all of the challenges, many cities all around this country and around the world have experienced. We see that there is a great need for a possibility and an avenue through which people can be able to eat.
Mm-hmm.
There is considerable hunger
Yeah.
in America in the midst of everything that is happening. There are food pantries in different spots, and I'm certainly sure your area might have some.
Our church.
And your church, what is that like? Feeding the hungry in Cincinnati is a big city, a place with several how standing institutions of learning, as you indicated. Is there are lots and lots of people who are going hungry as we speak, Pastor.
Yeah, what's the challenge around that? So our church, from a practical standpoint, that's probably one of the main issues that our church has been very good at. If someone were to ask me, what are the sterling examples of your church's service to the community, that would be, I would tell you, come on a Thursday between the hours of 10 a.m. Really, you need to start at 8 a.m. so you can see these people who faithfully come every week, members of this church, to unload the trucks that hold hundreds of pounds of food. And then they prepare them for the next several hours so that around 11 o'clock, there's a line outside of our church, and they're serving 500 people weekly for
Wow.
food. And now this is the incredible piece about this, and what links to our earlier conversation is the face of poverty, because we
Uh-huh.
have certain assumptions about who's in that line and who's not. But our team has learned that we serve lawyers, we serve people who have advanced degrees and terminal degrees, who have fallen on hard times, who can't get a job, so on and so forth. So even, and the reason I'm pushing us is because I'm trying to link us to your last incredibly poignant comment, which is that everybody thinks that they are in the middle class,
That's
right?
correct.
And so when you're dealing with issues of hunger, you are very easily and very quickly disabused of those delusions of grandeur. And you realize how rampant, how on the edge, which is really how we measure poverty, right? How
That's
close
correct.
to instability economically one is. And the reality is that most people in America are one paycheck away from being impoverished.
That's correct.
And with
Or being
great,
homeless.
or being homeless, right? Because
Yes.
the reality is banks aren't playing that game anymore with foreclosures. You know, the days of 2 month long, 3 month long, 6 month. I kept my house for 6 months as I went. They will foreclose on you. I was blessed just the other day to buy my first home here in Cincinnati, and what struck me was how quickly now I've bought homes in other areas. But when they sat down and had the conversation with us about how paying your bills and doing your mortgage, 60 days, 60 days is how many payments you can miss. That's 2 payments before the
That's
foreclosure
correct.
process starts. If you lose your job, how many people can find equitable work to where you are? Because that's what you need. You don't just need a job that doesn't get you, that just pays you. You need a job that's equitable to where you were. How many of us can really find that in 2 months? There are not many of us,
Oh, not at
even the
all.
most
Not at all.
gifted among us,
That's right.
who
That's
can
right.
get over the loss of a job, go and interview, get through the hiring process in 2 months' time. So the reality is the vast majority of Americans, as you have said, live in the grip of poverty. And so we have to, as I said before, demythologize our conversation around what one might call racial economics, right? Or so yeah, the racial capitalism. We've got to get rid of that. And I think that's the only way you can talk about it now, is to say, who is the face of the poor? And in our rhetoric in American politics, it's been people who are irresponsible. Very largely, it's been women, and it's been Black folk who have been the face of poverty in these places. But what we're seeing in this line on Thursdays is that some of the most responsible, hardworking people in the world cannot afford to purchase their own food.
Yeah, yeah, you were right about that, and I think that's where, for those of us who work in the trenches, even where I sit, where we serve every other Friday, there is a considerable line of probably over 200, and those are people who, if you go on the line and say you're doing the survey question, when the moral question is raised, you know, what class are you?
Right, right.
Nobody in that line wants to be want to be called below the poverty line. They're gonna tell you, argue strongly that they are in the middle class.
And political scientists tell us that it's part of why, right? And rhetoricians tell us it's part of why politicians use the phrase so much, because
That's right.
it's an ambiguous phrase that everybody thinks that they fit into.
That's right.
Right? It's a phrase that it's an easy phrase that everybody oh, he's talking about me, right? The assumption is that
Yeah.
he's immediately, but look at the policy. He ain't talking about you.
No.
He's not talking about you.
No, not at all. And
Donald
and,
Trump thinks
and
he's middle class.
and how many? I mean, for the global audience, those who are watching and listening to us, how do we demythologize this whole aspect about what American? I'm not trying to talk about exceptionalism is,
Mhm.
in terms of where we are,
Yeah.
in the reality, and those of us who see people on a daily basis, how people struggle and how people are struggling even in this liminal season that we
Mhm.
find ourselves in, an era of a global pandemic,
Mhm.
and jobs are hard to come by. They say, well, there are a lot of job openings all around the country, but the reality of the matter is that COVID has traumatized many.
Oh, absolutely.
uh, Returning to work has become a challenge. I mean, even from an emotional and mental standpoint.
Mhm.
Uh, what is that like for a person who is here, who is living within the context of what it is, the myth around what the American dream is, and as to what the actual realities of the times are within the context that we find ourselves here? And those who in different parts of the world who think probably the grass is greener on this side.
Well, I'm seeing some of the answer. That's an amazing question you asked, first of all. And I'm seeing some of the change already, I have to admit. In this in that part of demythologizing, and you know this as a fellow theologian, part of demythologizing is demystifying, right?
That's right.
Is to deal with stigma and to deal with the whole mystique, which can be good or bad, behind a certain category or condition. Um, and I think of it as, and it's the same way with diseases that have existed in our context, right? When there's a stigma, I mean, we saw that even with COVID at one point.
That's
We
right.
were branding people who had COVID as, I mean, how many cities cracked down on the homeless population, right? Because the notion was that these were people who were spreading COVID. Because they had nowhere to live, or so on and so. You just saw so much of that. And the same thing exists around poverty. How do we disabuse ourselves of those delusions? We start talking about it. And I'm seeing that in this generation. I'm seeing college students. As you know, I was a college dean for several
Mhm.
years. I'm seeing college students who are and colleagues of my own who are willing to come out and say, hey, I graduated with a PhD from Harvard or Drew or Princeton or such as, and I still can't get a job. I'm seeing people be willing to do that. Whereas 10 or
Right.
15 years ago, people were not. If you couldn't find a job, you weren't telling nobody that you were on the edge of poverty.
No, not at all.
But I'm seeing this like public radio, even. I'm listening to NPR and I'm listening to students and brilliant analysis, and even some of the anchors on there now who are talking about how difficult it was for them to find a job. But on the other hand, I think I'm seeing something in the workforce that the capitalist workforce is not ready to deal with, especially the racist capitalist workforce is not ready to deal with. And that is folks who are questioning work versus vocation, who are saying it is not enough for me to just make money in something that I'm miserable in. That was the ethic behind, and it's an ethic, right? Behind the Great Resignation.
That's correct.
Was that people were saying, yeah, I made money, but I realized being in this house that there's so many other things that I enjoy, and this sucked 8 hours of my life maybe out every day that I hate it. And why not go and do this thing that people are willing to take more risk. And I don't think our labor market is ready for that. I got proof of it. Go somewhere today. I was in a drive-through the other day and I was listening as a woman complained that she had a legitimate complaint about the customer service that she was experiencing in this drive-through. And the manager just came to her and he just said, look, I can't hire anybody else for this position. I know the person is horrible. I know she's really bad at her job. I know her attitude is terrible. I know the way she spoke to you is not the normal thing that we would tolerate in normal times, but this is no ordinary time. I can't find nobody to do her job.
Yeah.
And so it's changing even the way that consumers, the expectations that consumers have. And if the rates continue, which they are supposed to be raised again, right? The mortgage interest rates, if they continue to rise, it's really going to be challenging because you're going to have people who don't fail to qualify for homes because they don't make enough money. They're going to fail to qualify for homes because they don't make enough money to meet the interest rate.
Amazing.
It's
Amazing.
crazy if you think about it.
Amazing times we find ourselves in.
Yeah. So I can still, I mean, it's the same house, right? It's the same $250,000
that's
that
right.
the house is selling for, but because the interest rate is 9 or 8% now, you can't afford that anymore. What you could have afforded, a few months ago, you can no longer afford that. I mean, we have to think about that there are cities where people who are doctors and lawyers. I lived in Boston. I had plenty of friends. Several of my friends graduating with very good solid medical degrees from Boston University School of Medicine. They can go anywhere they want in the world. Very elite program, very accomplished people. They cannot afford to buy homes. Their parents own homes.
That's correct.
But they will never be able to afford to buy a home in those contexts on a doctor's salary.
That's right. That's right. And I think one of the things I've observed lately has been that they said, well, Gen Zs and millennials, from statistics, are returning to their parents'
Oh,
home.
absolutely.
Because the reality is affordability has become an issue, and within the social context of social justice, I think these are some things that we have to strategically demystify. Not only that, but from a social justice context, begin to examine the whole aspect of what capitalism is, that is done at the expense of the ordinary folks who are just trying to get by. And we've come to realize that in the context of it all, that what affects one affects all, that we are all interconnected. We are all interlinked intrinsically. And COVID, to some extent, has proven to us that, some of these models of the capital market has brought for us, and even the parallel times that we find ourselves in, banks are going bankrupt, and this considerable fear that exists. What can we be able to do as moral leaders to call, to begin to even sound the warning again, to go deep into scripture and the sacred text, to remind people that it's just not about how much we own, how much we have to borrow, the things that we have to eat, the clothes that we have to wear all of the times, in keeping with the context of the consumerist nature,
Mhm.
consumerism that is eating up the fabric. We have to return to normality. I think that urgency of time exists that we can begin to enlighten a lot of our people within our churches and within those secret spaces that people can know and come to realize that we are human beings and we are children of God. And it's not about the excesses. It's not about how much cars or vehicles we own or how many are packed in the garage. You can live just considerably a simple life, a life that is genuine, is humane, is spiritual. How do you talk about some of these issues within the context of the church? The
Well, I think mhm.
church folks can be made aware
You get,
to know.
you're getting where I wanted to go with this, which is some of this is going to depend on our ability to exorcise some of this from our biblical interpretation and from our theological imagination, right? That there is a sense in which there is a sense in which the ability to consume has been latched on to being blessed, and the ability to and I'm talking about to consume feverishly, right? Is
That's right.
is a symbol and sign of having found favor with God. Furthermore, how do we come to a reading of the Christian faith that does not make capitalism uh tantamount to Christianity?
That's
Because
correct.
in the American mind, theologically, capitalism very often is the only way for one to live as a Christian in American society. And what it does is, I'm not saying that socialism is any better necessarily, right? I'm entitled to some views that I may have on my own, but I'm not convinced that blind acceptance of socialism or any other economic system is going to bring about the kingdom of God. I'm done with that. I'm past that. What I do think though is that it creates this space in which capitalism becomes unquestionable, because
That's correct.
capitalism becomes synonymous with Jesus and with Christianity in particular. So how do we deal with it in churches? We're gonna have to be honest about some of the ways that we have misconstrued theology. And let's stop lying and blaming it on uneducated prosperity preachers in certain communities, right? Because we do that a lot. Some of that is a symptom of the issue. It is not the issue. And so I think we got to have some more honest conversation that there are plenty of progressive mainline churches that maybe they don't espouse it from the pulpit, but they espouse a prosperity gospel ethic in the midst of their congregations. When I see congregations that are sitting on endowments of millions of dollars, and they ain't got a single black person in leadership within their context, and they're in major spaces, we got an issue, and we got to be ready to talk about that.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. And I think that is quite crucial.
I hope I don't
It
get
would.
you in trouble with your audience today, but
Oh no, not at all. I think this is very, very enlightening. It's a fascinating conversation. And I think we need to have these conversations from time to time to bring clarity, not only to our national audience within the context, the American context, but also the global audience that will listen to us to have a better understanding. We have to be truth. We have to speak truth to power, to some of these moral issues that we face. And it took me just to reflect on what is it that we are, even in this Lenten season.
Mm-hmm.
that Isaiah calls us to, what true fasting is. True fasting within the context of Isaiah 58. What is it? How can we share?
Yeah.
Keeping in mind that it's just not having, like you said, within the context of the consumer culture that urges us that to buy more and more is what actually will bring happiness. It really doesn't. How do we share with the poor? How can we take on that challenge that is urging us to do a kind of fasting? And within the context of Isaiah 58, I just like to read a couple of lines, beginning with verse 6. It tells us, it's not this kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. It is not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter when you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be near God. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, "Here I am." If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and the malicious talk, and if you spend yourself in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night rather, will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. And it goes on and on. But the reality of the matter is, we are interconnected
Yes.
as human beings. That challenge is on us. Those of us who are moral leaders, those of us who have been called, set aside to play the role that in this particular, not only this liminal season, but in history,
Yes.
as to the fact that we stand on the shoulders of heroes, of freedom fighters
Yes.
who've come before us, who've created this space, that we can even have this conversation, that
Yes.
you and I can talk the way we talk, that we can bring some clarity, ethical clarity, moral clarity to some of these burning issues
Mm.
we've deliberated on today, Pastor Cook. It's always an inspiration that we can have you with us.
I'm
And
always
this
glad to
has
be
been a very fascinating conversation today as you join us from Cincinnati. And as you begin a new assignment, we are hoping and praying that we can bring you time and again to be able to speak to our global audience. Just before we wrap up, let's get closing statement from you, my brother. You have a very tight schedule on a Tuesday. Let's get closing statement from you, and we are hoping that we'll have you back again. We continue this conversation. I'm going to be informing the audience probably the next time when we do this. We will have an infomercial and a promo to send at least a week before, and we will open the telephone lines to see whether, as we discuss some of these perennial issues, that we can take calls from our global audience who
Yes.
will
Yes.
have concerns and will want to interject. Let's get closing statement from you, sir.
Well, I have nothing profound. I just want to say thank you to you again, Dr. Pede. I mean, you always get me fired up. And then at the end of the hour, I got to go work off some of this steam or something. So it's a pleasure. But anytime we can talk about these issues and be honest about them, and it's going to take an ability to hear what's uncomfortable and to listen through dissonance and discomfort. And so I want to challenge all of those who are listening to really think about where you are being called to being uncomfortable and to commit to listening even there.
Yep, the voice of my brother, a great scholar from the forest, Madison, from the south side of Chicago. He joins us this afternoon, this day, this evening, depending on your geographical location, wherever you are. Our brother has joined us from Cincinnati, Ohio, where he sits, where he's currently serving as the senior pastor of Lincoln Heights Missionary Baptist Church. I want to say congratulations to you. I did not indicate that from the very beginning, but we appreciate you, brother, and there is a purpose. As one of the books of wisdom reminds us in Ecclesiastes, that there is a time and a season for everything under the sun. And I'm certainly sure that as we are continuing this conversation, West Africa is asking me, where is our brother? Where
Yes.
is Pastor Cook?
And if you would get
Uh,
me there, if the Lord
well,
would use you, if the Lord would see fit to use you to get me there, uh, it would be my great honor,
oh, surely we
because I
will.
probably could deal with some of these issues that I
Yeah,
have if I could
yeah,
sit there a
we
little
would
while.
take you. We would take you, and we are working on that to see how we can organize an international seminar and bring in pastoral folks from
Yes,
all around the country and see how we can have you there at least for a week to be to engage
yes,
both on the pastoral and scholarly level to give some insight to some of our upcoming spiritual moral leaders. But it's actually been great having you with us today. I'm
Mm.
going to let you go because of time. We are almost hitting the 1 hour mark. So thank you so much.
You be well, my
Uh,
brother.
yeah. And the peace of God be with you. Give my regards to the family. To that young man, I have not been able to meet in person, but
But you'll be here to preach soon,
I am coming to Cincinnati by the grace of God.
because you know the
Take care.
last time I brought you, everybody fell in love with that accent and voice. So you'll come again.
All right, brother. You take care. And to our global audience, it's been great having Pastor Cook, Julian Armand Cook, with us today. He's been our special guest. We will be back again sometime this week. We're going to be bringing a social campaigner who happens to be a social justice advocate for Liberia, based here in the United States. Councillor Jerome Verdier. Councillor Verdier is the former chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Liberia. And he will be coming to join us on the Justice Forum to speak on a wide range of issues facing the African and the West African state of Liberia. Until then, take care. So long.
Bye bye.
Take care, my brother. God
Take care,
bless.
man. Thanks so much.